T-minus controllable. We are still go at this time. T-minus 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9. Here we have ignition sequence start. The engines are on. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Blast off! There he goes! Man in space!
Deluxe man in space, complete with missile base. With astronaut and satellite, you send them into flight. 3, 2, 1, fire! Deluxe man in space.
Traveling through time, discovering new planets, life forms, and conflicts in outer space, confronting the deadly mutations of advanced scientific technology, and taking the journey of a lifetime through the utterly alien landscape of the human body. All of these classic stories have capitalized upon man's eternal preoccupation with technological concerns of the past, present, and future. The translation of these tales to the silver screen has resulted in visual storytelling of such extraordinary and memorable imagination that an entirely new genre has been carved out from the history of the motion picture medium, from George Méliès to George Lucas, The Lost World to 2001, from robot monsters to giant tarantulas and insects. The world of the science fiction film has encompassed ideas that are alternately fantastic, alienating, and downright humorous. What actually separates the science fiction story from the one of pure fantasy is a bedrock foundation of available scientific knowledge. When a factual occurrence such as space travel is extrapolated by the imagination into a fictional story of intergalactic war, and when that story is visualized using the infinite dynamics of the cinema, a science fiction movie is born. Perhaps the true genesis of the science fiction form began in the garret of author Edgar Allan Poe. With The Purloined Letter, Poe perfected the detective tale. But with Hans Pfaall in 1835, he invented the science fiction story with a wonderfully imaginative yarn that spun new twists on the era's burgeoning interest in moon watching. But it was French novelist Jules Verne, 30 years later, who truly popularized the science fiction story and went down in history as one of the two true founders of the genre. Verne's novel, 5 Weeks in a Balloon, published in 1863, was the first in an incredibly popular series of imaginary voyage novels, which captured the very essence of 19th century optimism. And 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea in 1870 introduced one of Verne's most charismatic creations to readers, Captain Nemo. Nemo was the charming yet tortured commander of the Victorian-style submarine called the Nautilus, and made a return appearance in Verne's sequel novel, The Mysterious Island, in 1875. But in 1895, British author Herbert George Wells challenged Verne for the science fiction throne with the publication of his first novel, The Time Machine. This seminal work of science fiction literature was compared at the time to the writings of Robert Louis Stevenson and Jonathan Swift. But The Time Machine's main focus was scientific discovery, and its story, which brilliantly and disturbingly charted man's eventual evolution into a new form of life, set the standard for other H.G. Wells novels to come. The Island of Dr. Moreau, published in 1896, was quickly followed by The Invisible Man, War of the Worlds, and The First Men in the Moon. But while the science fiction of Jules Verne focused on the positive effects of man's technological advances, Wells' sensibility always cautioned against technology's potential to completely overwhelm the human soul. These twin viewpoints, that science is on the one hand benevolent and on the other a harbinger of technological dangers, represent the two modes of science fiction embraced by the movies. Pioneering French filmmaker George Méliès, an ex-stage magician who was inspired by the imaginary voyage novels of Verne, made the first science fiction movie, A Trip to the Moon, in 1902. The light-hearted film featured a wildly imaginative plot that was complemented by truly innovative special effects that he perfected in his colorful and captivating music hall routines. And at a time when most movies existed as merely short vignettes, A Trip to the Moon was a full 21 minutes long, and is regarded by many movie historians as arguably the first narrative film ever made. In the 2 decades that followed the Méliès classic, the silent movie industry exploded with the talents of Charlie Chaplin and D.W. Griffith, and saw the gradual emergence of a genuine science fiction sensibility expressed on film. The Lost World in 1925 charted a fantastic story within a science fiction context, as an expedition to the South American jungle discovers prehistoric monsters living as they did millions of years ago. Based on the 1912 novel by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the film featured an all-star cast that included Wallace Beery, Bessie Love, and Louis Stone. But the movie's real stars were its 49 miniature dinosaurs, brilliantly animated by the special effects team of Fred Jackman and Willis O'Brien. Their groundbreaking process of stop-motion photography brought the various prehistoric creatures to vivid life for movie audiences of the day and foreshadowed the ultra-realistic sophistication of special effects techniques in science fiction movies to come. But although The Lost World presented dramatic battles between humans and dinosaurs, it was ultimately a positive outlook on the importance of scientific discovery and was thusly aligned with the benevolent Jules Verne viewpoint. But Metropolis, Fritz Lang's epic 1926 German film, fell squarely on the more pessimistic H.G. Wells' side of the equation, heralding a nightmarish vision of the machine-age future. The visual style of Metropolis set a new imaginative standard for the science fiction movie. The dark, brooding atmosphere perfectly complemented the story of a society so completely overwhelmed by technology that the very essence of the human soul is threatened with extinction. And in 1929, 3 years after Metropolis, Lang made The Woman in the Moon, the last significant science fiction film of the silent era, and a surprisingly realistic forecasting of actual lunar voyages to come. The movie's scenes of rocket launch preparation, as well as its flight to the moon sequences, were so accurate that when Adolf Hitler came to power, all existing prints of the film were recalled and subsequently destroyed. Hitler feared that the other world leaders would see the film and learn too many secrets of German rocketry. But with the advent of talkies in the late 1920s and early 1930s, science fiction movies added audio imagination to an already formidable visual flamboyance, and the result was some of the most innovative motion picture entertainment ever produced. The lavish Just Imagine, released in 1930, was not only the first important science fiction film of the sound era, but remains one of the few science fiction musicals ever made. Set in the year 1980, it presented a society in which people are identified by numbers, babies are born in vending machines, and steaks come in the form of pills. And the movie, produced at the very height of the Prohibition era, forecasted that liquor would remain illegal throughout the 20th century, and that bootleg whiskey, in the form of exotic tablets, would provide the future with a continuing and flourishing black market. As the eye-popping innovations of science fiction captivated movie audiences during the 1930s, its imaginative possibilities quickly became a pervasive force in the publishing world through pulp literature, comic books, and intellectually stimulating novels. The era saw the gestation of such stellar talents as Ray Bradbury, Kurt Vonnegut, and Robert Heinlein in the fiction field, and saw the explosive popularity of Philip F. Nowlan's creation Buck Rogers expand beyond the realm of pulp magazines to include the syndicated comic strip. And in November 1932, Buck Rogers graduated to radio, where his 25th century space opera adventures were presented to an entirely new audience of instantly devoted fans. Death rays, gamma bombs, and a mechanical mole burrowing through the earth were all created on the radio program using vividly atmospheric sound effects, and the crackling buzz of Buck Rogers' psychic destruct ray was provided by a handy Schick electric razor. And accompanying the radio serial's 7-year success on the airwaves was an almost constant promotional campaign that offered toys, cardboard space helmets, and a map of the planets to eager young listeners. Buck Rogers' popularity was such that in 1934, a Virginia department store substituted an actor disguised as Buck for its annual Santa Claus. And Buck Rogers' wholesale comic strip and radio success inspired the creation of another staple of 1930s science fiction stardom, Flash Gordon. Flash's initial comic strip appearance in 1934 introduced a future with an exotic twist, as Flash and his perennial fiancée, Dale Arden, fought the evil forces of Ming the Merciless on the planet Mongo. Flash Gordon, the movie serial, produced 2 years later, further popularized the futuristic hero's legacy and starred Olympic gold medalist Buster Crabbe in the title role.
The guards! They've escaped, sire. I can see that. Don't send out a general alarm.
The success of this first serial led to two follow-up productions, Flash Gordon's Trip to Mars and Flash Gordon Conquers the Universe. And Buster Crabbe also appeared as Buck Rogers in a 1939 serial that saw Buck's classic battle with the evil Killer Kane finally brought to cinematic life after years of radio and comic strip success. The high-flying cinematic success of the Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers serials inevitably inspired more realistically oriented science fiction during the 1930s, making the sci-fi movie a staple of 1930s Hollywood. The concept of underground tunnels connecting the continents was a popular theme in science fiction throughout the early part of the 20th century, but it wasn't until Transatlantic Tunnel in 1935 that the technological challenge of such an undertaking was fully explored in a big-budget film production. The movie starred Richard Dix, C. Aubrey Smith, and Walter Houston as the President of the United States, and featured a world of 1940 full of futuristic trains, global television, and TV phones. And Art Deco cities, complete with artificial sunlight, were the hallmarks of Things to Come, the 1936 film version of H.G. Wells' astonishingly prophetic Depression-era novel. Wells himself wrote the screenplay for the visually stunning film, which, among other things, accurately predicted the coming of World War II. Directed by acclaimed production designer William Cameron Menzies, the movie starred Raymond Massey, Cedric Hardwicke, and Ralph Richardson, and dramatized Wells' signature discourse. The scientists in the movie constantly argue for progress, while the humanists continually insist on absolute limits to experimentation. But despite the continually evolving visual and intellectual sophistication of science fiction movies during the 1930s, the most significant sci-fi event of the era was unquestionably the Orson Welles radio production of War of the Worlds in 1938. The 60-minute broadcast was an adaptation of H.G. Wells' classic novel of 40 years before, but the widespread panic that accompanied the Halloween night radio version was largely due to Orson Welles' inspired device of reporting the progress of the Martian invasion documentary style in the form of dramatic news interruptions of a sedate program of light music and commentary.
Program of dance music to bring you a special bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News. At 20 minutes before 8 Central Time, Professor Farrell of the Mount Jennings Observatory, Chicago, Illinois, reports observing several explosions of incandescent gas occurring at regular intervals on the planet Mars. The spectroscope indicates the gas to be hydrogen and moving toward the Earth with enormous velocity.
I'm of course surprised that the H.G. Wells classic, which is the original for many fantasies about invasions by mythical monsters from the planet Mars, I'm extremely surprised to learn that a story which has become familiar to children through the medium of comic strips and many succeeding novels and adventure stories should have had such an immediate and profound effect upon radio listeners.
The image of a visibly shaken young Orson Welles making a public apology to a nation's radio listeners dramatically demonstrated the all-pervasive power of the radio medium, a phenomenon that H.G. Wells had accurately predicted at the turn of the century. And despite the increasing sophistication of sound movies and the introduction of Technicolor cinematography during the late 1930s, radio continued to be the most popular means of entertainment in America and a tireless promoter of the science fiction sensibility. Chicago-born radio personality Arch Obler used radio's power of imaginative suggestion to brilliant effect in such 1930s and 1940s radio shows as First Nighter and Lights Out. But despite successes on the airwaves, science fiction virtually disappeared from the movies with the advent of World War II. Its near-total absence from the public eye allowed for the development of real-life technological advances, such as jet propulsion, digital computers, and atomic bombs, to catch up with their cinematic counterparts. But as the 1950s began, science fiction exploded across the country's movie screens in an onslaught of films which primarily dealt with the overwhelming realities and potential dangers of atomic testing. But Destination Moon, released in June 1950, was a matter-of-fact presentation of a lunar expedition and a remarkably serious investigation of the problems involved. The movie's groundbreaking special effects, supervised by, among others, Walter Lantz of Woody Woodpecker fame, included dangling astronauts from wires and manipulating them like puppets to accurately simulate the zero-gravity conditions of outer space. Written by Robert Heinlein and produced by the innovative George Powell, Destination Moon became one of the biggest hits of 1950, and its success paved the way for other science fiction films of the era. Rocket Ship XM, also released in 1950, starred Lloyd Bridges and Hugh O'Brien in a story of a lunar voyage that suddenly takes a dramatic turn when the rocket ship is blown off course to Mars. And in 1951, When Worlds Collide saw scientists preparing for the end of the world, in a George Powell production that won an Academy Award for its extravagant special effects. But The Thing from Another World, produced by the legendary Howard Hawks, presented a dramatic confrontation that typified the science fiction movie of the 1950s, Earth versus a creature from another planet.
Get in the corner. Now hold this in front of you. Stay by the light switch.
1.9. Needles hit the top.
Also in the year 1951, The Man from Planet X featured a space alien visiting the Scottish Highlands in an unusual science fiction movie directed by cult filmmaker Edgar G. Ulmer. But it was The Day the Earth Stood Still that ushered in the unusually conscientious and profoundly intellectual approach to science fiction in the movies. The film's timely anti-nuclear message was taken out of the standard science fiction context of monsters and mutations, and was dramatized instead with brilliant humor, restraint, and compassion. Michael Rennie as the benevolent space alien, and Patricia Neal as the young woman who befriends him, delivered two of the most remarkable performances in science fiction film history.
I came here to give you these facts. But if you threaten to extend your violence, this Earth of yours will be reduced to a burned-out cinder.
He's a robot. Without you, what could he do?
There's no limit to what he could do. He could destroy the Earth.
All vehicles, close in. Let's go.
Invaders from Mars, an unusual visual treat filmed in 3D by director William Cameron Menzies, told the story of a Martian invasion from a child's uniquely vulnerable perspective.
Invaders from Mars. He saw them land from outer space. He saw them capture innocent people only to destroy. Father turned against son. People changed into strange, weird animals. A general of the army becomes a saboteur. The boy's parents changed into killers.
But nobody's getting anywhere out there. Nobody can locate anything, anybody. The Martians. We've got to stop them.
Invaders from Mars, capturing humans at will for their own sinister purposes, turning them into diabolical instruments of destruction. Invaders from Mars, weird, fantastic beings of a superintelligence, ruling a race of synthetic humans and pitting them against mankind's dream to conquer the universe.
Come on, step on it. Search every tunnel. We gotta find Renault and the kid. When the colonel gives the signal, get back here on the double.
And War of the Worlds, produced by George Pal in 1953, starred Gene Barry in a phenomenally realistic adaptation of the H.G. Wells novel. The movie's amazing special effects, which featured an unforgettable interpretation of the Martian attack ship, won an Academy Award.
This could be the beginning of the end for the human race. For what men first thought were meteors or the often ridiculed flying saucers are in reality the flaming vanguard of the invasion from Mars.
Looks like they're going to come out of that gully pretty soon. We'll have to rush our defenses to be ready when they do.
Guys need plenty of reinforcements.
We'll get them. Lieutenant! Look!
They slash across country like scythes, wiping out everything that's trying to get away from them.
That explains why communication is cut the moment their machines begin moving.
Monkey all's blacked out. Nothing more's come through.
Same thing that happened on the Pacific coast. Anything from them yet?
No, Mr. Secretary, we've had nothing from San Francisco for over 5 hours.
The nations of the world mobilize their armed might, rushing to defend the Earth against the unknown weapons of a super race from the Red Planet. Is there nothing that can stop the Martian death machines?
Guns, tanks, bombs. They're like toys against them.
We know now that we can't beat their machine. We've got to beat them.
All over the world, human beings cower before the onslaught of these unearthly enemies, whom no one has ever seen. Panic that sweeps around the globe as the great masses of mankind flee blindly in a headlong stampede of hysteria.
The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms brought together the talents of science fiction fantasist Ray Bradbury and his lifelong friend, stop-motion special effects expert Ray Harryhausen.
Buried somewhere under the polar ice cap, in a state of suspended animation, are the awesome creatures, the leviathans that roamed the earth at the dawn of time. And under certain conditions, a nuclear explosion could free one from his icy tomb. Then, guided by instinct, the beast would come back to the caverns of the deepest Atlantic where it was spawned. An armored giant, wreaking his prehistoric fury on modern man and his puny machines. Cities would be terrorized by the cruel intruder from the past. Populations crazed and panicked with fear by its destructive force. Granite and steel would crumble. Soldiers and their weapons would be powerless before the onslaught of the beast. The beast. The beast. The beast from 20,000 fathoms.
Herald Square, 34th Street, Broadway. Every section of the city is guarded. No one knows where the monster will strike next.
Another one, Colonel?
No.
You know where the radioactive isotope is?
No, but if it can be loaded, I can fire it.
I'll load it. Just remember one thing. It's the only isotope of its kind this side of Oak Ridge, so you can't miss.
The stunning advancements in motion picture technology embraced by the big-budget science fiction movies throughout the early 1950s were noticeably absent from more modestly budgeted films, such as the infamous 1953 film Robot Monster. The laughably bad movie featured an alien from outer space who was clearly just an actor wearing a gorilla suit, with a diving helmet ludicrously added to unintentionally comic effect. Robots also figured prominently the next year in Gog, which saw twin robots programmed on a mission to sabotage a missile station. And Target Earth, starring Richard Denning and Virginia Gray, featured robots as part of a frighteningly intimidating warrior battalion invading a deserted city. By the mid-1950s, science fiction films could no longer be characterized strictly by their positive or pessimistic Jules Verne or H.G. Wells sensibilities. Instead, they took on either a low-budget, bargain basement quality or a sophisticated and intellectually conscientious approach to the genre. This Island Earth, released in 1954, remains one of the most suspenseful science fiction movies ever made and presented audiences of the era with a uniquely existential investigation of man's relationship with the universe. Them, released the same year, revitalized the languishing atomic mutation genre, showcasing giant ants running amok in the Southwest and in the Los Angeles sewer system.
Cities, nations, even civilization itself, threatened with annihilation, because in one moment of history-making violence, nature, mad, rampant, wrought its most awesome creation. Born in that swirling inferno of radioactive dust were things so horrible, so terrifying, so hideous. There is no word to describe them.
We may be witnesses to a biblical prophecy come true, and there shall be destruction and darkness come upon creation, and the beast shall reign over the earth.
Yes, the earth, the skies above and the seas below, infested by swarms of nightmare creatures, crueler, deadlier than the armored giants of prehistoric eras. Here is a wild, headlong flight into terror as the desert erupts with the grim battle for survival. Here is a fear-frenzied moment of suspense as mankind totters before a thing that multiplies faster than it can be killed. Here is a desperate plunge into the black depths of the earth, where human courage challenges the brute force, the slashing jaws, the poison fangs that guard the subterranean nest where the beast spawns its terrible progeny.
To all units, condition red. Grain 267 is the target area. Repeat, condition red. Grain 267 is the target area.
Is there any type of gas we could use?
No, we can't take a chance. It might poison the whole city.
20,000 Leagues Under the Sea was the granddaddy of all 1950s science fiction movies, a big-budget Walt Disney adaptation of the Jules Verne novel that saw an utterly accurate translation of the French author's Victorian-era vision to the movie screens of 1954. The film starred Kirk Douglas, Paul Lucas, and Peter Lorre, and featured James Mason as the complexly charismatic Captain Nemo. The film's magnificent art direction and special effects each won Academy Awards, and the movie's influence on science fiction cinema to come was incalculable.
The motion picture screen explodes with unprecedented power as the two masters of imagination, Jules Verne and Walt Disney, join to bring you a shattering new experience in entertainment. Read by countless millions, translated into 18 languages, this classic adventure is a story of measureless scope, fraught with fantastic beauty and danger. 4 great stars give the spark of life to its leading characters in a series of inspirational performances. Kirk Douglas as the master harpooner Ned Land,
Got a whale of a tale to tell you, lads, a whale of a tale or two, about the flatland fish and the girls I've loved on nights like this with the moon above. A whale of a tale and it's all true, I swear by my tattoo.
James Mason as Captain Nemo, who held the destiny of the world in his hands.
The real story of the ocean depths begins where you left off. Wonders that defy my powers of description. The secrets that are mine alone.
Paul Lucas as Professor Aronnax of the Paris Institute.
I asked you to leave, Professor. You also asked me ashore to show me man's inhumanity to man. Why? To justify this, you are not only a murderer, you are a hypocrite. The proof lies out there. You call that murder?
Peter Lorre as Conseil.
Sure we're friends. Go ahead, hit me. Hit me. You mean that? Sure, go ahead, you can't miss it. Now we are friends.
The most vivid scenes from the novel become unforgettable on the screen. The luxurious interior of the submarine. The revelation of the hidden mysteries of the deep.
We do our hunting and farming here. Underwater, the sea supplies all my wants.
The mighty harvests of the ocean kingdom. And the strange creatures that menace the intruders on the ocean floor. And after a safe return, the memorable dinner party.
Remarkable. This tastes like veal. The flavor deceives you. That is fillet of sea snake. I guess this isn't lamb. That is brisket of blowfish with sea squirt dressing, basted in barnacles. What is it? It's a recipe of my own. Sauté of unborn octopus.
And to stay in your memory as the most thrilling sequence ever photographed in motion picture history, the terrifying battle with the giant squid.
It Came from Beneath the Sea, released in 1955, directly capitalized upon the allure of the Jules Verne movie in a superb sci-fi story that featured a huge octopus emerging from the Pacific Ocean to terrorize San Francisco.
Reels under Holocaust as the men and weapons of the atomic age battle to the death against the ageless monster of the deep.
And Tarantula, released the same year, also invested a bubblegum science fiction idea with true intellectual weight in a superbly plotted story of a scientist's experiments with growth formula and the formula's subsequent effect on spiders. The movie featured a very young Clint Eastwood as a military jet pilot. 1956 saw the production of two of the most original and ambitious science fiction films in all of movie history. Forbidden Planet featured a magnificent cast and introduced the now familiar Robbie the Robot. And its out-of-this-world plot was incredibly enough, a fantastically imaginative adaptation of Shakespeare's The Tempest.
Welcome to the planet called Altair 4, where a strange, invisible force threatens the lives of anyone who invades his domain. Welcome to the world of Morbius and his planet of mystery. Welcome to the Forbidden Planet.
Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the same year, was a landmark example of 1950 science fiction, capitalizing on the paranoid hysteria of outer space at a time when the first actual rocket launches were being made. Atomic Mutations were the order of the day in 1957, and Beginning of the End, starring Peter Graves, saw giant grasshoppers terrorizing Earth and its inhabitants. The Deadly Mantis saw the giant creature moving on New York City after gestating in the frozen Arctic. And The Amazing Colossal Man featured an Army officer in Las Vegas whose exposure to an atomic test blast starts him growing. The rebellious energy of teenagers were set against space aliens in Invasion of the Saucermen, starring a young Frank Gorshin. And War of the Colossal Beast, a sequel to The Amazing Colossal Man, found the mutated army enlistee of the first film encountering further problems with his outrageous growth. The Incredible Shrinking Man took the mutated growth equation in the other direction, and a uniquely existential story by Richard Matheson that saw the hero and movie audiences along with him forced to view the world from an entirely different and utterly compelling perspective.
This is Orson Welles speaking. I have 45 seconds to tell you about something I think you'll remember the longest day you lived. It's about a man named Scott Carey. A few months ago, he was 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighed 190 pounds. Today, he's 2 inches tall, and you can hold him in the palm of your hand. Now he lives in a world where he must fight for his life, a world where a friendly house cat is a predatory monster.
Incredible, because it's almost beyond imagining. Incredible, because every hour he gets smaller and smaller. Incredible, because every moment the terror mounts.
But despite the success of such similar growth mutation films as Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, the eye of the world and the movie-going public increasingly turned to the very real frontier of outer space as the 1950s came to a close. Technological advances in jet propulsion and outer space exploration combined to create a thrilling atmosphere of genuine discovery throughout the era and gave birth to a marketing boom of jet-age toys that included robots that walk and rockets that fly, and turned every neighborhood into an outer space fantasy world for youngsters. The subsequent Sputnik and Mercury space programs not only inspired the race for space, but an explosion of Hollywood science fiction as well. It, The Terror from Beyond Space, released in 1958, told the story of a Mars mission's return to Earth with a blood-sucking monster stowaway on board the ship. The effectively claustrophobic film, which takes place almost entirely within the returning spacecraft, featured 1930s serial hero Ray Crash Corrigan as the rampaging monster. And the movie's direct influence on Alien 20 years later lends it a particularly distinguished status in the annals of the era's science fiction. I Married a Monster from Outer Space, released the same year, vividly showcased the paranoia of the time as invaders from another planet come to Earth and take on the appearance of humans in order to breed with earthly females. Queen of Outer Space, released in 1958, and considered by many sci-fi purists to be one of the worst genre movies of the era, starred Zsa Zsa Gabor as a Venusian with a hilariously Hungarian accent.
Landing on an unknown planet, they are captured by long-limbed beauties. When they say, "Take me to your leader," and they take them to a creature like this, you'll know they're on planet Venus. And the Queen of Outer Space is Zsa Zsa Gabor. The most talked about woman in the world knows what she wants on Venus, too.
Then
We're the only men on the whole planet?
Yes.
Wow. You'll see the revolt that brings the planet under the domination of strangely masked females who hate and fear the male animal.
Let me kill her now.
You're not only a queen, you're a woman, too. Let me see your face.
The savage horrors of fearsome mutated beasts. The war of the sexes, when voluptuous Venusians give battle to spacemen from Earth. The destructive might of incredible space rays that stop men from returning to Earth.
Prepare for maximum acceleration.
And the Toho studio in Japan also injected comedy into the science fiction craze, creating two of the most memorably tongue-in-cheek monsters in the history of science fiction, Godzilla and Rodan. But The Fly, released in 1958 and starring David Hedison and Vincent Price, again brought science fiction to bear on the more serious inner concerns of man, as a scientist attempting a matter transference experiment mutates into a half-man, half-fly creature. The success of the film spawned a sequel, Return of the Fly, the following year, and a third production, The Curse of the Fly, in the mid-1960s. But Angry Red Planet, released in 1959, featured the usual American space expedition and added rather unusual encounters with both carnivorous plants and the flying spider bat. First Man into Space saw an American rocket pilot returning to Earth after flying through a meteor cloud covered with a crusty fungus. The strange organism proceeds to kill him, but continues to inhabit his body. And taking a break from the Godzilla and Rodan monster epics, the Toho Studios created The Mysterians. It was the first widescreen Japanese science fiction production ever, and featured a marauding band of alien invaders whose base of operations is the moon, and whose mode of attack is a deadly robot army set loose upon Tokyo, Yokohama, and Osaka. Journey to the Center of the Earth, also in 1959, starred James Mason as Professor Oliver Lindenbrook in a big-budget adaptation of the Jules Verne novel. And the H.G. Wells viewpoint was well represented the following year in the George Powell production of The Time Machine. The film starred Rod Taylor and Yvette Mimieux, but its most astonishing creation was the Time Machine itself, designed by George Davis and William Ferrari as one part comfortable Victorian armchair and the other part knobs, gadgets, and time-altering switches.
Such stories as H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds and Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea have challenged mankind. So today, man is successfully probing deep into the mysteries of the universe. Can he penetrate the greatest mystery of all, time itself? Creative magic of George Pal and the fabulous production know-how of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer to catapult you through time into a world that is yet to be.
Why is it that we usually ignore the fourth dimension? You see, we can move in the other three. As the doctor said, up, down, forwards, backwards, sideways. But when it comes to time, we are prisoners.
Inventor Rod Taylor's breakthrough into the realm of the fourth dimension is defied by his friend Alan Young.
If that machine can do what you say it can, destroy it, George, before it destroys you.
Every moment is a year, hurtling through the atomic wars of the future on an incredible excursion into the unknown. What are the people like? Is this the human race of the future? Or is this the Morlocks, fiendish creatures who live in a weird underground world? And the Eloi, the tranquil sunshine people, who the Morlocks dominate and maintain like cattle, luring them below with the hypnotic wail of the sirens, to feed upon them in cannibalistic horror.
But lower-budgeted productions, such as Roger Corman's Wasp Woman, also helped usher science fiction into the 1960s. Master of the World, based on the Jules Verne novel of 1904, starred Vincent Price as Rober the Conqueror a Nemo-like inventor whose message of world peace prompts him to take flight in a giant Victorian-styled Zeppelin. And television also started showcasing the sci-fi sensibility. Programs such as The Outer Limits, My Favorite Martian, The Invaders, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, Lost in Space, and The Time Tunnel brought science fiction into the living rooms of America on a regular basis during the decade. And television cartoons such as The Jetsons only added to the overwhelming pervasiveness. But because of television's enthusiastic embracing of the genre, and as a result of the popular success of the real-life Gemini and Apollo space programs, science fiction became an increasingly scarce commodity in the movies during the 1960s. Mysterious Island, however, was one of the best Jules Verne adaptations ever, and showcased some of Ray Harryhausen's most astonishing stop-motion animation effects.
Mysterious Island. Starring Michael Craig, who triggers the screen's most thrilling escape. Gary Merrill as a war correspondent. Joan Greenwood, shipwrecked on the mysterious island. And in this story of survival, Michael Callan and Beth Rogan.
Come on.
What's it doing?
I don't know.
Sealing us in.
Also starring Herbert Lom as the mysterious Captain Nemo and his fabulous submarine, the Nautilus.
Aren't we able to do anything to save ourselves?
There's nothing that can be done.
Super Dynamation, newest and greatest screen process, astonishes the eye with such scenes as the fight to the death with a prehistoric devilfish, the discovery and destruction of an underwater city, Mysterious Island, photographed on land, under the sea, and in the air. Truly a first in motion pictures.
Harryhausen's magic also brightened First Men in the Moon, a lavish interpretation of the H.G. Wells novel in 1964. But Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove, subtitled How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, brilliantly lampooned both the paranoia of the times and the technological optimism of the era. Francois Truffaut's interpretation of Fahrenheit 451, starring Julie Christie, chronicled an impressive-looking and equally disturbing view of a book-burning totalitarian future. And Fantastic Voyage in 1966 took the shrinking man concept to its furthest extreme yet, in a story about scientists reduced to microscopic size in a journey through the human bloodstream. The Illustrated Man, released in 1968, was a loose adaptation of Ray Bradbury's short story and starred Rod Steiger. But the year's most impressive science fiction film was also one of the most important in the history of cinema, Stanley Kubrick's 2001, A Space Odyssey. Based on the novella Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke, the movie catapulted science fiction from the fanciful domain of genre fans to the intellectual arena of genuine philosophical contemplation. 2001 also established an absolutely believable future world in which the spaceships and moon bases, and even zero-gravity toilets, all bore the mark of distinctive authenticity. Planet of the Apes, also released in 1968, was an invigorating adaptation of Pierre Boulez's novel, which saw Earth's future ruled by apes of superior intelligence and their enslavement of humans to perform menial tasks. The film sparked 4 sequels, released throughout the 1970s, as well as a popular television series. But the science fiction television programs of the late 1960s remain, even today, some of the most impressive and imaginative ever produced for the medium. Star Trek, showcasing the adventures of the starship USS Enterprise, was one of the most critically acclaimed and universally beloved television programs of all time. And its mid-1960s success led to movie productions in the 1970s and 80s, and a revisionist television series created more than 20 years after its initial appearance. Producer Irwin Allen also contributed to science fiction's television legacy with The Time Tunnel and Land of the Giants in the 1960s. Anthony Burgess's arresting novel, A Clockwork Orange, provided the basis for Stanley Kubrick's movie of 1971. Featuring Malcolm McDowell in the central role of Alex, the film presented a stinging view of the future and an insightful glimpse at the nature of violence eternally within the human soul. Soylent Green, released in 1973, starred Charlton Heston in a bleak tale set in Manhattan in the year 2022 and featured Edward G. Robinson in his very last movie role. Logan's Run, set in the year 2274, saw a society in which life ends at the age of 30. The film later inspired a brief television series of the same name. But it was Star Wars, written and directed by George Lucas, that captivated not only the world's interest in Darth Vader, R2-D2, and Luke Skywalker, but a sudden and wholesale enthusiasm for the science fiction genre itself. Released in the summer of 1977, the film combined elements of fantasy with an astonishingly inspired visual and technological sense, and translated the basic essentials of the earlier Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers serials into an imaginative realm of innovative popularity. The film's deft mixture of humor, drama, and romantic intrigue also single-handedly set the standard for the science fiction explosion that resulted. Close Encounters of the Third Kind, written and directed by Steven Spielberg, took a more realistic approach to science fiction, extrapolating the subject of UFO sightings to a benevolent conclusion worthy of Jules Verne. But Alien, and its sequel Aliens, took a far darker look at the future and presented an impressively grim visual appreciation of technology's potential. Science fiction's renewed popularity throughout the late 1970s and early 80s also led to impressive big-budget remakes of classic earlier films. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, The Thing, The Fly, and even the Flash Gordon serial were remade. From Australia came Mad Max, a terrifyingly primitive view of future society starring Mel Gibson that saw international popularity and 2 sequels. But as if a tonic to this dilapidated view, The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi continued the light-hearted Star Wars legacy well into the 1980s. But Blade Runner, directed by Ridley Scott and starring Harrison Ford and Rutger Hauer, presented a magnificently depressing Douglas Trumbull-designed vision of Los Angeles' future, full of rain, neon, and negativity. Dune, based on the visionary Frank Herbert novel and directed by David Lynch, was one of the most expensive movies ever made when it was released in 1984, and was ultimately one of the most fascinating. And 2010, a sequel to the Stanley Kubrick hit of the late 1960s, followed up on what exactly went wrong with that infamous voyage of the Starship Discovery, in a film which starred Roy Scheider. But the penultimate science fiction film of the 1980s, and perhaps of all time, was unquestionably Steven Spielberg's production of E.T., the Extraterrestrial. The emotionally charged film likened the alienated experiences of a suburban child to the wayward feelings of a small space creature, and the result was one of the most successful motion pictures ever made. On a more happy-go-lucky note, Back to the Future and its 2 sequels took the time travel notions of H.G. Wells to their most hilarious and suspenseful extremes. And Starman, featuring Jeff Bridges in an Academy Award-nominated performance as a space alien come to Earth, again investigated the popular science fiction theme of other worlds attempting peaceful contact with Earth. And as the dawn of the 1990s approached, The Abyss, starring Ed Harris and directed by James Cameron, took audiences on an undersea excursion into the truly fantastic. With the revitalization of America's space shuttle program in the late 1980s, not to mention the success of specialized science fiction bookstores around the world, the sci-fi movie continues to be a powerful force at the nation's box office. And the imaginative qualities of science fiction itself, coupled with its ability to transport audiences not only to other worlds, but to new ideas and attitudes, herald its continued success as one of the most fundamentally exciting movie genres ever created.